Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us.
All right, now we're back for part 2 of this special edition of Socializing Security. If you listened to part 1, welcome back. I'm so excited that you're listening to part 2. This has been one of the most fun episodes I think that I've had the pleasure of editing yet for the podcast. So I'm really excited. If you have already listened to part 1, go ahead and skip ahead for the next chapter. I'm just going to go ahead and do the little redo of the previous episode where I introduce the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is, again, is there still a fight for privacy, or is it still really the fight for security? And you've heard this many times on the podcast, so I'm really grateful that you're continuing to listen in. If you've been socializing with us for a while, I will say too, just with everything that's going on in the news lately, as well as just, it's been really cool to see these episodes release right now. It just feels like privacy is having a moment, and this is not the first time this has happened. I want to be very clear. Privacy has a moment every couple times. Sometimes if there's a really big data breach, privacy has a moment, or if there's a really large regulatory change. For example, back in 2018, when the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, came out, that was the big moment for privacy. This is not the first time that privacy is having a big moment with everything that's going on in the news. But I will say that it's been really healing and also really refreshing to listen to some of the answers from some of the experts that we've had the pleasure of bringing on for our podcast at Socializing Security in 2024. And it's really also queuing me up to think through, I'm going to keep the question. I was actually thinking about at the beginning of this year, I was like, hey, for 2025, maybe, we'll pick a new question. And I think with everything going on, I definitely want to keep the question the same, just because listening back, everybody's answer has been different. And I've learned from every single one of our social network speakers that they've really, come through and really been saying like, hey, no, this is my thought on this really important thing. So, continue to give Brian and I feedback. We love it. So please interact with us. I think right now LinkedIn is the best way to catch us. But if you're listening, I still believe in the fight for privacy. So I will give you my answer at the end of this episode today, but I just want to kick it off and let's talk to the speakers. Welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. This is Milou, and this is a special edition episode. So I'm going to go back for 2024 and look through all of our amazing, incredible answers from our Socializing Network, our speakers that have joined us over the past year, to answer my favorite question that we pose at the end of every podcast, which is there still really a fight for privacy? And I'll give you the backstory, but about almost a couple years now, I had a CTO tell me that he thought that the fight for privacy was dead and that now it was the fight to security. For me personally, it crushed my soul a little bit, but you'll hear my response in our look back episode with all of our amazing speakers from 2024. So we're really, really excited that we're able to do something like this, and we can't wait to continue to ask the same or similar questions for what's coming this year. Well, Mark, as part of our brand identity, we do have a question that we like to ask our guests to just kind of create a little bit of cohesivity between the episodes. So I had a CTO recently say that he believed that the fight for privacy was dead and that now it's the fight for security. And I would love to just hear your take on that, of what you think about, especially whether that's as somebody who's advising a company more on like public data or as a consumer. Either is totally fair game.
Yeah, I mean, so in a way, privacy is trying to hide something, and I don't think anyone has an expectation of privacy in the world today. I mean, especially not when we're all on social media, putting our own stuff out there for everyone to see. The best way to keep something secret is to hide it, but if someone knows where it is, then you have to shift to strategies to defend it, and that's inherently more complicated. And it's not fun. It's not a fun thing. It's not going to the beach and cooking hot dogs. People don't want to do it, so we have to tell them, hey, it's like going to the doctor. You have to get the shot, even though you don't like it. You have to take care of your security. So that's why this really is a great podcast, and I love listening to it. Because even I, who like the topic, sometimes it's so big and can be a little boring. I feel like you have to gird yourself up to get into it. But you guys make it so approachable and fun. I think it's really a great service to humanity, or at least everyone listening, at least.
High expectations, but appreciate it, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Steve, I have our departing question, and we ask all of our guests this, and I'm really curious to kind of hear where you would land. But I had a CTO recently say to me that they thought that the fight for privacy was dead, and now it's the fight for security. And I would love to just get your thoughts on that.
The fight for privacy is dead. I think, I mean, I don't think it's lost. I think we've taken the fight for privacy in the wrong direction. The fight for privacy has been something that has been focused on protecting a company from the ill effects when they don't look and take care of someone's privacy, right? Like, that's such a backwards thing. Protect the guy that's using my data versus protecting the guy whose data it is. And I think we're really backwards there. I don't think the fight is lost, but without sounding anti-capitalist, maybe, we have to do more to hold these organizations accountable, and make that fight about the right person, about the right entity, maybe I should say, versus person. Protect the records. Don't protect the company that holds the records. I honestly think that's the struggle. Now, the fight for security, that changes. Yes, that fight is strong. It has been strong. The problem is we're having this conversation about basics, about fundamental things, and I was doing the same thing back in 2005. like why am I still talking about inventory and vulnerability management being like the keystone, the very most important thing 20 years later? Like, why are we doing this? Let's solve this once and for all, or at least figure out a way to make it real. Like, it's one step forward, two step backs. It feels like sometimes in the security fight. But as I mentioned 100 times, 5 times in this podcast, the tools that we have available today are incredible, and so much more than we had, 10 years ago, 15, even 20 years ago, of course. But I think it's all a good fight. Like, keep fighting. It's a good fight. The burnout's real, but I think it's a fight worth fighting.
Great.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that was awesome. Great note to end on too. So, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We really enjoyed the conversation. But we've all known each other for a while, so it was a little bit of a relief for us. But hopefully that came through to be a much more enjoyable conversation for.
I'm going to pivot, and I think this one isn't super surprising to you because I know we spoke about this in Disco Posse as well on your podcast, but I do like the cohesivity of making sure that we're kind of wrapping up all of our engagements talking about the same thing, especially with your background in marketing. Obviously, I think we've talked about this before, but figuring out, I had a CTO recently say that the fight for privacy is dead. And now that it's really the fight for security. Is that something you inherently would agree with, or is something that in your perspective, you're like, no, there is still value in privacy? What are your thoughts on that?
Privacy is, in my opinion, a fundamental human right. And I would build products that ensure that is respected. The protection of privacy does not mean that it's the way you manage data. You may have to collect information, you may have to hold, but there are ways in which you can think towards privacy and always bias towards privacy, bias towards protection, bias towards resiliency, build anti-fragile systems that are self-managing. That's the real goal. The path to get there is a long one, and along the way you do a lot of cool things and you get a little closer with each step. And when we get to privacy, the one thing that obviously in very recent news was things around Microsoft recall. Again, I don't mean to pick them as a vendor, but as an example of letting something go out the door as an idea and then having people test it. And then immediately it's like, did anyone in marketing talk to a human that's going to use this product, or anybody in security? So I don't think we needed to be the point of where I have to have a Mr. Bean routine to like take my hard drive and unplug it from my laptop, put it in a drawer, and then lock that into a room, and then put that behind a fire extinguisher with a mousetrap. I don't need to do this crazy, ultra overprotected, but simple things of, can we make sure that we manage data in a way that respects privacy? And when it is being used and it has to be pulled in, let's be transparent about how we use that data. And as we see more and more around, especially with compliance frameworks, where we talk about what it used to be called vendor relationship, now it's called third party, whatever the acronym is, because we have not enough acronyms.
New phrase.
Yeah. But third party relationship management and third party, environment management. It's not just us, but my payment providers, my storage providers, my cloud providers. So when we look at privacy, we have to make demands of our vendors that ask them the question, quite honestly, how are you doing this? And that's why people are SOC 2 is like kind of the big thing, was an early startup. You have to have certain provisions in place. That doesn't mean you're protected. You want to say, like, how do you use this data? I'm doing a presentation tomorrow as we're recording. Of course, it'll happen by the time this goes live, about using AI tools for VMware vSphere operations. And it's biased towards privacy. It's all 100% local models that are using local tooling so that it maintains your data protection. Because even though the terms and conditions, again, OpenAI, great friends of mine, love the stuff they're doing, and I pay for it. So it says, well, we don't use this to train the model. But you do store my data for 30 days. And a lot can happen in 30 days, including the change of those terms and conditions that we just check because we want to get back into the product. Scroll, check. There's no greater lie than this. You may feel a little pressure, and I agree to the terms and conditions.
Yeah. Well, that's another whole podcast at some point, is the terms and conditions one.
But privacy, no, Eric, I'll say like that. And I didn't mean to step on you, Brian, but like,
nope, go ahead.
If I lay it down to one thing, privacy is always a risk, and we have to be mindful of it. We don't have to be, living like the guy in the accountant movie, but we can do small things. And it's really important that we think with a bias towards privacy at home and then at work. And it can be as simple as just, do you have a sticky note on your monitor that has a password on it? Because I have a particularly good camera. And so it's not hard for a little thing to happen where you zoom in and you say like, hey, a 4K camera, you'll be able to read the date on the stamp on my partner's, ticket in the picture. It's wild what you can do. So small things like that, just be careful and think a little extra. But, I wish I had the answer. It's always going to be a risk. It's just a matter of making sure that you're comfortable being aware.
Yep.
So Josh, to give a little bit of cohesivity between some of the professionals that we're chatting with, I had a CTO that I spoke with a couple months ago now that we were talking about the fight for privacy versus the fight for security. And their argument was basically that the fight for privacy is dead and that now that it's the fight for security. I would love to just get your perspective on that. Do you think the fight for privacy is dead? Do you think there's still a valuable fight in the fight for privacy, or is it a little bit of both?
I think the issue with the fight for privacy is that it's not well defined. It's a moving target, that different regulations and it's also quite subjective. This should be private versus, is it? Everybody knows it. Does it really count as private? I would agree to some extent that the fight for security is more tangible. It is something that you can look across. There's frameworks. There's all these controls, regulations, standards, guidelines, and you have a target to go for. privacy is this concept that what is essential to me, it belongs to me, and no one else can have it. I think the biggest detractor to that is the fact that so many people openly give away their privacy. You click on the EULA for every app without reading it, and don't recognize the fact that you just gave away your data. You know that I tell people this all the time. If the application is free, you are the cost. Which means when you said yes, you gave up the ability to tell them that they can't collect data on you, whether it's your personal data, your buying habits, your surfing habits, whatever. There's some data that they want, and you gave them permission to collect it when they gave you this thing to do for free. So
yeah.
That's kind of I would say that it's really it's not that privacy is dead. It's just it means something different to so many people. It's not an easy thing to pinpoint. Whereas security, you can say, oh, well, we adhere to this set of controls or this standard or this regulation. It's PCI DSS or NIST 853 or whatever it is. There's something that you can put parameters around, and it's a target that you can actually go for. Where privacy is this concept. If you're in Europe, you got GDPR, and it means, that's what privacy means. But if you're, in the US, privacy is different, and it's not the same everywhere, and it's very difficult to say this is privacy.
Yeah, actually, the fight for privacy is also different where you ask, not only who you ask, but also where you are and what, yeah. I love that answer. I think I can totally understand as somebody who's built out information security programs such as yourself. I also am somebody who loves guardrails and standards and a pretty bright line rule of, is this secure, yes or no? So I can totally understand where you fall on that. So Tom, I do have a departing question, and we're really going to try to do this for all of our speakers, because it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, specifically like in my space, where I had a CTO recently say, hey, the fight for privacy is dead, and now it's the fight for security. And I would love to just get, again, there's no right or wrong answers. I would just love to hear your feedback on that. Do you think it's the fight for privacy? Is it still alive, or is it now the fight for security?
It's a tough answer, and I'll tell you why. Go ask any 15-year-old kid what privacy looks like. I promise you their answer is going to be radically different than what you or even your parents would say. Like, how many times have you heard about an older person? Well, they're very private. Like they don't give that information out. But yet those are the same people that get wrapped up in these filter bubbles because they keep liking things on Facebook or other social media platforms, not understanding that that is invading their privacy, right? Whereas a younger person, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, has a very different perspective on what privacy versus security is. They know their information's out there. They're doing what they can to protect that information from being shared in places that it shouldn't be. Like someone brought up a fact the other day. In the US, a social security number is actually in a lot of places. It's not bad that an SSN is out there. What's bad is that the number of companies that associate your social security number with so much other PII that they're inextricably linked. That's where the problems start happening. So I think that privacy is always going to be very conditional. Like, obviously, there's certain things that I don't necessarily want people to have, but it's up to me to provide as much security of that as possible. So, like, for example, I don't like people emailing me bank account information in clear text. I would rather log into a portal. Or something as simple as when I answer the phone and people are like, can you confirm this information for me? No, I will not confirm this on a telephone call. It is your responsibility to send me information that I authenticate back to you. I'm not reading out that information on clear text because I've just given you something that you didn't already have. Like, you need to prove it to me. But that's a shift in mentality, right? Like, it used to be, you can't know anything about me. Like you can't know my last name. You can't know my mother's maiden name, all that other stuff. I can find that. Like, that's easy to come across now. What I need to do is I need to create more challenges in my organization to prevent people from doing that. So, like, here's a good example. Something like business email compromise has become a huge security hole, right? Like, how many times have we heard the joke of, why is the CEO emailing me asking me to send him $1,000 in Apple gift cards to pay off this contractor? Like, as someone who is security savvy, there are so many things along that line that immediately triggered like problems. Like, we don't pay contractors in Apple gift cards. We don't send those card numbers out over clear text anyway. Like, why is the CEO emailing me this instead of coming down to ask me those questions? You've got to create that challenge and response method. And even if it's something as simple as, well, cool, can you give me the passphrase of the day? Well, we don't have a passphrase of the day. Yes, but if that person responds with an attempt at the passphrase of the day, or says, oh, well, we don't need a passphrase of the day for this particular transaction, now you've already got a problem. You've created a pseudo two-factor authentication for an in-person exchange. And like, that's how I treat things all the time when people call me, even if they're my loved ones. I'm like, okay, we need to have some kind of other out-of-band communication. So like, I'll text them and I'll be like, are you calling me? Like, what's going on? So that when they get back to me, they're like, well, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm like, now we've got this thing going on. So that adds a layer of security on top of information that I thought should have been private, but maybe necessarily wasn't.
I love it. So I think you have kind of both. I think there is still part of you that still thinks there is still a fight for privacy, but you're also taking on additional responsibility for your personal security, which I absolutely love.
The optimist in me wants to say yes, but the cynic in me knows reality is different.
I was going to say, it sounds like the relationship status it's complicated.
Exactly.
I recently had a CTO tell me that he thought that the fight for privacy was dead and that now it's really the fight for security. I would love to just get your thoughts on that. Do you feel like the fight for privacy is dead, or do you still think there's like a valiant effort there?
I think that there are a lot of organizations and a lot of different policy perspectives on how do we keep things that should be private. The fight for security is important. And that's where companies, they have breaches all the time for your data that's protected, and how much do we trust them? But it goes back to that question before then, is sometimes it's a question of trust and sometimes it's a question of knowledge. How many EULAs do we click on, or how many things do we accept because it reduces friction? And until something bad happens, most people aren't going to be that concerned about it. And then whenever something bad happens, they probably become a very loud voice in the room on the matter of privacy.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's a complement between the two, right? I don't think the fight for privacy is dead personally, but I think the fight for privacy does absolutely dictate the need for the fight for security. So I think that's really where a lot of security professionals are saying, well, because we need to establish that trust in secure systems, because we don't want to end up in the news. Off into kind of our closing question, but I will just say it's refreshing to hear that we're getting a lot of people that are very concerned about their privacy, because I feel like we in the market are seeing a lot more just like that we're kind of getting used to all being impacted by breaches, and we're seeing less of a prioritization of privacy, which again is kind of where this conversation that happened with the CTO that I like to ask our guests of, I had a CTO recently tell me that he thinks that the fight for privacy is dead and that now it's really the fight for security. And, given your unique background, specifically with the type of people that are asking like, hey, I don't actually want you to share my photos, where do you feel like we are with this? Is the fight for privacy dead, or is it still well and alive?
It's definitely alive. People want their privacy, especially when it comes to children, when it comes to their families, personal events. We do birthday parties for kids, for example. There are other parents there who also have privacy concerns. I do not think privacy is dead at all. I think, in fact, it's actually married to security and it's married to compliance. It's one of those things you can't separate. As much as you want to say privacy is dead, then you might as well run an ad against Apple. But it's not going to work because people actually care.
That's refreshing to hear. Definitely refreshing to hear that you feel that strongly, and talking more on the consumer side than our typical guest is. to hear people say that, yeah, we want you to protect these photos because of privacy is awesome to hear. So really appreciate that answer.
Well, thank you all for listening to part 2 of this special edition episode of Socializing Security for Is the Fight for Privacy Dead? Yes or no? And the social network that we've had over the last year got to weigh in. And, just to highlight what I said at the beginning of the episode, I'm happy to just kind of weigh in and give you where I kind of currently am. And actually, my answer hasn't changed. So when that CTO originally, and this was a couple of years now, so I keep saying recently, but it was a while ago, and I feel like I should just admit that I'm aging myself, and that's okay. It's been years. But this CTO, and I will say too, excellent at their job. So I have nothing negative to say, but I will say that when I heard them say that they felt like the fight for privacy was dead, it broke my heart. It broke my heart because it's something that I care so much about as a practitioner, and something that I believe just from like an ethical and moral and just like my personal stance is that privacy is one of the most important things that we have. Without it, we're just data. And so I absolutely believe the fight for privacy is alive. I believe, honestly, right now, it's probably one of the most important fights that we have. I do believe that privacy goes hand in hand with security. And we have had some really excellent speakers say something similar to that, that the fight for privacy isn't dead, but the fight for privacy has evolved into securing our systems to protecting the most sensitive data, whatever that data is, right? And again, Brian and I have said this on the podcast many a time. My risk tolerance is different than Brian's, is different than yours, is different than your neighbor's, is different than your parents', right? I cannot tell you one way or the other whether or not you're doing a good thing with your privacy, just because like I have no idea. I'm not you. And in the same way, I might do one thing for my personal privacy that works for me and my family that does not work for you. And so that's why I love this question so much. And because there's so much nuance to it, is that the fight for privacy is still alive and well. And the fight for security is also still alive and well. The two go hand in hand together to me. They are separate things. For me, at least, I do believe they're a little separate, but if those two teams, especially if you have a privacy and a security organization, or if you're one person, I've worn this hat many a times for many companies where I'm privacy, security, and compliance and IT. We do it all, and it's the same hat. Same person, different hats. And I would say that for me, I would love to work for an organization where those functions are separate, where they work together and collaborate. That I think is how I would see it as the most effective for an organization. If you have privacy leaders, you have security leaders, you have compliance leaders, you have legal leaders, you have IT leaders, like anybody that wants to be involved on the fight for privacy, they should all be in the room. You know what I mean? I think if people are championing privacy, let's bring them in. Let's collaborate and work effectively together, because it's exactly what Brian and I had talked about on the year in review episode, which if you haven't listened to it, check it out. It's probably one of the favorites that I've done so far for the podcast that we've done. And I would just say, think through about what it is for you to protect your personal privacy. And as long as you feel comfortable with the decisions that you're making for you, your family, for your most sensitive information, whether that's your bank details, your HR records, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some niche examples. I don't know. There's so many different ways to protect your personal privacy, but all I ask is be mindful of it and gamify it to make it fun. You'll hear this time and time again on the podcast where I'm like, hey, we're really great at securing corporate systems, but we're not great about protecting our personal privacy. So again, my ask to all of our Socializing Security listeners, first off, thank you for socializing with us. We love it. Thanks for participating and listening. This, again, has been one of the most fun episodes for me to edit. But also, just be thoughtful about what you're doing to protect your own personal privacy. And as long as you feel comfortable with the decisions that you're making for yourself, then go forward. I will happily debate you on a password manager any time of the day. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach me. But I would just say continue the fight for privacy, and also let's continue the fight for security. For me, they're one and the same. They're connected, they're linked, but they are different. And I think they're worthwhile. And let's keep asking our social network on the podcast of what they think in 2025. Thank you so much again for listening. We really appreciate it. If you haven't listened to part 1, go back and check it out because the answers were great.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.